From Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sergeant Ganell, Officer Fanone, Officer Hodges, Officer Dunn, you are great law enforcement officers and a hero to law enforcement officers across the country. You are great public servants. You are a hero to public servants across the country, but you are great Americans and you are heroes to all of America. And long after you are gone, you will be remembered as heroes to our country, along with your fellow officers. And those who attacked you and those who beat you are fascist traitors to our country and will be remembered forever as fascist traitors. Now, Officer Dunn, I've got to start with you because you're my constituent. And you are the pride of Maryland today because of the way you stood up for the Capitol and for the Congress and for our democracy. But you said something fascinating in your testimony. You said you've never seen anybody physically assault a single officer before in your 13 years on the force, much less thousands and thousands of people attacking hundreds of officers. So how did you experience that when it first happened?
So with regards to the never seen, I've seen videos of officers being attacked and people resisting arrest, but to clarify, it's never been the assaults on the scales that we have seen like that before. I just wanted to clarify that. Can you repeat your question?
Well, actually, it leads to my next one, actually. You made a really interesting point. You said you'd seen protests for many, many years. You'd seen even civil disobedience for many years. There's an effort today to portray the events of January 6th like some kind of resurrection of Dr. King's March on Washington in 1963. You know, and I've seen a lot of protests here too. I've seen the March for Our Lives that the young people did about gun violence. I see people marching for DC statehood, arguing for their rights to representation in Congress, and I've seen civil disobedience. But was this like any of those rallies or marches or demonstrations you'd ever seen? And if not, what was different about it?
So the marches that the protests that you specifically talked about, I'll go a step further and talk about the ones that had the potential to be not so peaceful. You had the Million Man March rally, the 20th anniversary of it. It was a lot of opposition to that. You had the Klan that came up here. You had people that were pro-guns that wanted to come up here. So all of those had the potential to be very violent and frankly quite deadly, but they did not. This wasn't the first time that, if I can just use this quote, the MAGA people came up here to the Capitol before. They were in DC before. There were some skirmishes, but it was never the attempt to overthrow democracy. They came up, I think this was maybe their second or third time that they had come up on January 6th. And even then, as belligerent as they were, it didn't account to this violence. So the only difference that I see in that is that they had marching orders, so to say. When people feel emboldened by people in power, they assume that they're right. Like one of the scariest things about January 6th is that the people that were there, even to this day, think that they were right. They think that they were right, and that makes for a scary recipe for the future of this country. So I think that's why it's very important that you all take this committee seriously and get to the bottom of why this happened, and let's make it never happen again.
Thank you. Officer Fanone, I think you've given our committee our marching orders today, which is to hold the line. You held the line, and now we've got to hold the line. So I want to thank you for that. If we show a fraction of the courage and the valor that you all demonstrated on January 6th, then we will hold the line in this committee. But I want to ask you about holding the line. I want to go back to this question of weapons so we can clear this up, because there are still some people who are saying that the insurrectionists were unarmed. And I wonder what your reaction is to that, because we've heard about, well, first of all, rampant baseball bats, lead pipes, Confederate battle flags, and so on. And what about the question of firearms? So what is your reaction generally to this proposition that they weren't armed?
First and foremost, I would say that the implements that you just described are most certainly weapons. With regards to firearms, I know that in the days immediately before the January 6th insurrection and January 6th itself, firearms were recovered by law enforcement from individuals in Washington, D.C. Who were believed to have been participants, or at least those who were planning to participate in the January 6th insurrection. And yes, those were firearms, handguns, and such.
Forgive me for these questions, but I've got to ask you, apparently in some nether regions of the internet, it's being said that you, Officer Fanone, maybe were mistaken for Antifa and that's why you were nearly beaten to death that day and carried in the crowd. Is there any way you think you were mistaken for Antifa?
Well, I was in full uniform. I was, like I said, wearing my uniform shirt adorned with the Metropolitan Police Department's patch. I had my badge on until somebody ripped it off my chest. I do not believe I was mistaken for a member of Antifa.
You mentioned in your testimony that there's some people who would prefer that all of this go away, that we not have an investigation. Let's let bygones be bygones. But you seem pretty determined to get the country to focus on this. Why is that so important to you?
Well, first and foremost, because of the actions of officers who responded there that day, specifically from my department, but also from the U.S. Capitol Police and some of the surrounding jurisdictions. Downplaying the events of that day is also downplaying those officers' response. And like Sergeant Cannell said, some of the officers, part of the healing process from recovering from the traumatic events of that day is having the nation accept the fact that that day happened.
Some people are saying that, that as public servants, you all should not be speaking out, that cops, firefighters, teachers should just serve the public but should not speak out as citizens. What do you think about that, Officer Finnan?
Well, I disagree. I've been outspoken throughout my career, never to this magnitude. As an undercover officer and a narcotics officer, I've preferred obscurity in the public eye. However, this event is something that we have not experienced in our lifetimes.
Officer Hodges, I read your testimony carefully. I hope every American reads your testimony. But I noted that you referred to terrorists or terrorism 15 different times to describe the people who were assaulting officers, dragging them through the crowd, stealing their weapons, smashing them over the head, gouging eyes, and so on. However, some of our colleagues have been calling the violent insurrectionists not terrorists, but tourists. Why do you call the attackers terrorists, and what do you think about our colleagues who think we should call them tourists?
Well, if that's what American tourists are like, I can see why foreign countries don't like American tourists. But I can see why someone would take issue with the title of terrorist. It's gained a lot of notoriety in our vocabulary in the past few decades. And we like to believe that, no, that couldn't happen here. No domestic terrorism, no homegrown threats. But I came prepared. U.S. Code, Title 18, Part 1, Chapter 113, B as in Brown, Section 2331. The term domestic terrorism means activities that involve acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or of any state, and B, appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, or to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping, and occur primarily within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States.
Well, thank you for that. And I had one final question for Sergeant Cannell, but it looks like my time is up, so I'll yield back to you.